Madam President.
The senator from Texas.
Madam President, I rise today to join many of my colleagues, as Senator DeMint has just said, to endorse the balanced budget amendment that Republicans are offering. We have 47 Republicans in the Senate, and there are 47 co-sponsors and supporters of this approach to a balanced budget. Our approach addresses the fundamental problem in America, and that is government spending. Big problems require bold action. Today's staggering national debt, $15 trillion, is crippling our economy. We must take action to stop it. The 40-year average of total U.S. federal government spending is 20.8% of gross domestic product. For 2011, federal spending was 24.1% of GDP. Looking forward, if we stay on the same course that we are on, federal spending is projected to be 40% of GDP in 2046, and by 2085, it will reach 75% of GDP. Now, Madam President, we're reading a lot of stories about European countries that are doing exactly what we're talking about the future for America will look like if we don't curb spending right now. Some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle think that increasing taxes will reduce the deficits. However, the facts state otherwise. The trajectory of government spending, as I have outlined, could not be met with tax increases. There are not enough tax increases if you went to 100% rate of tax. There would not be enough to support that kind of government spending. In addition to that, as we have been saying, increasing taxes is going to lower the capability of our small businesses to hire. And that's what we're trying to spur right now, is more employment. It is going to take systemic changes in government spending to get the debt and deficits down in this country. Lower spending is the only way we can have the systemic changes that are necessary to lower the government burden so that the debt begins to get less and less. Now, my colleagues across the aisle have proposed their solution with a different approach to a balanced budget. In our opinion, it is flawed because it fails to include a supermajority required to raise taxes, and it separates Social Security from the federal budget. Now, that might seem like a good idea on its face to assure that Social Security never goes under, because there would be a connection. Actually, there would not be a connection between Social Security and the federal budget. But in fact, as we speak today, it is part of our federal budget, because we are going less and less in Social Security outlay with what is coming in revenue from Social Security. Excluding Social Security from our federal budget would not solve our deficit spending, nor shore up Social Security's finances for current and future generations. Right now, Social Security is on a glide path toward insolvency. I firmly believe that entitlement reform is vital to any long-term solution to our nation's financial problems. It is essential that we assure the markets that long-term financial challenges are being confronted, and that includes entitlement reform, so that Social Security will be on a glide path towards solvency rather than the other way around. Earlier this year, I proposed a modest Social Security reform that would gradually increase the retirement age so that it more closely resembles the actuarial tables of today and how long people are living with good quality lives, and it would decrease the annual cost of living slightly by adjusting it if it exceeds 1%. If inflation exceeds 1%, then you would have a cost of living adjustment. Otherwise, you would not. In addition to spending reductions and entitlement reform, we need long-term pro-growth tax policies in place, not constant threats of tax increases. When we hear our small business people talking about why they're not hiring, because I think probably every one of us in this Senate, as we travel around our states and in the country, ask our small business people, why aren't you hiring? Why aren't you adding to our economy? And they say two things, Madam President. They say, number one, the regulations of this country are driving them down. It's like a blanket over their capability to produce, get more traction, and hire people. So it's over-regulation that we are seeing rampant in this administration. And the second thing is that our president is always talking about tax increases. He talks about it every time I see an interview or a speech. Those people out there need to pay more taxes. Well, you know what? If you're being constantly threatened with more taxes, you know that you've got to look at your budget and adjust. And that adjustment usually means you're not going to hire people if you know your expenses are going to go up through regulations and more taxes. If we're going to keep the conditions in this country better for private sector job growth in this country, which certainly would lead to a stronger economy, we've got to address spending and tax policy. Our balanced budget amendment moves forward on these fronts. We reduce spending responsibly to put our country on a fiscally responsible path. We can shift the spending trajectory in this country by passing the balanced budget amendment and implementing a long-term plan that caps federal spending. The federal government has grown exponentially in the last few years. We have seen the federal debt just about double in 2.5, well, now almost 3 years. Madam President, we can't sustain that. That is not a responsible position when we know unemployment is almost 9%. We've got to have policies that will encourage employment, and that's the way to grow revenue. We can grow revenue, but not by taxing the people who are hiring, but by giving them a regulatory playing field that is responsible and not overbearing, and by making sure that we have not only a tax policy that encourages hiring, but one that is stable and predictable. If taxes are going to change every year, that's not predictable and it's not stable. I hate it when I talk to an international company and I'm talking to someone in that company, maybe the CEO or the chief financial officer, and I say, why are you moving that part of your company overseas? And they will invariably say, because there is a better regulatory environment. Madam President, that's shocking. It is shocking for an American CEO to say, we can better predict what the conditions for regulations are in foreign countries than we can in America. Madam President, that is not the foundation to revive our economy. We have a balanced budget amendment that we believe addresses the issues of this economy, and it will put caps on federal spending, and it will start bringing down the size of government to meet the gross domestic product of our country. Right now, it is off balance, and we need to put it right so that we do start hiring in this country in the private sector. Hiring in the government sector is not a long-term growth strategy. We need jobs in the private sector for permanency, and we will do that with a balanced budget amendment that puts caps on spending. Systemic change is what is necessary in this kind of environment. I hope that members on both sides of the aisle will look at these amendments and realize that we could help the jitters in the market get calmed by addressing this in a long-term way. And the balanced budget amendment that we're offering and we will vote on tomorrow is the best approach, and it is looked at by people in the real world, the business world, the hiring world, and they're saying that what they need is stable regulatory environment and taxes that are not confiscatory so that they will have the ability to hire more Americans and create bigger revenues by people who are working and producing, people who are going to pay taxes, people who are going to export and keep our economy on a growth pattern rather than one that continues to just sit there with a high unemployment rate that is stagnating our country. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Wyoming.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I rise today to join with the senator from Texas and agree with her about the need